Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi and welcome to the 27th episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. My name's Ryan Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode I'm speaking to Alex Stott. Alex is a strength and conditioning coach specialising in motorsport and racing drivers and co-owner of Be An Athlete Gym in Surrey. I ask him the questions I ask all my guests: who he is, what he does, where has he come from, what's he done along the way, what are the key moments from his career, what are his top areas of interest? What are the most valuable things he's learnt? Who are his top influencers? What are his top resources for information? What are his top sports performance exercises and or drills? And what are his top pieces of advice in life, exercise and or sport? As usual, we freestyle a lot in between questions. Really enjoyed speaking to Alex. Motorsport is a true passion of mine, so it was great to get him on the show. Hope you enjoy the episode. Here we go. Alex, thanks for joining us on the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. It's great to have you on. Could you just start by letting everyone know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Alex Stott. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I tend to work mainly with racing drivers. I've also done some work with boxers and a few other athletes in other sports like UFC, cycling, triathlon as well, and co-own a gym in Surrey.
How long have you been working with athletes in motorsport for, and how did you come about that? When did you get your kind of first opportunity?
So I've been working with athletes in motorsport now probably about 10 years. I've always had an interest in motorsport, always been interested in racing, always been something that I've been around or that I've followed. So it's largely come from that. I've always had a sporting background, competed in multiple different sports myself as well. So it's kind of combining the passion for the two, the passion for the sport, for developing athletic performance, but also the enjoyment of motorsport. In terms of how I first came about that, it was actually before I went to uni. I went and did a load of work experience with Elliot and Andy up at the Porsche Human Performance Centre at Silverstone. So it was doing some work with them in there, which was with racing drivers involved in motorsport, but actually they did a lot of triathlon stuff as well, so guys doing marathon disables, Ironman triathletes, etc. So that was the initial route into it before going to uni.
So what type of motorsports athletes did you start working with, and now what kind of motorsports athletes do you work with now?
So my route in that front's probably pretty back to front to most people. So, for most people when it comes to motorsport, the route in is normally working with karters and young drivers and working your way up. For me, when I was doing the work experience with Elliot and Andy up there, I was straight away dealing with guys who were racing in Formula 3, guys who are racing in Formula Ford, so kind of the junior single-seaters, but at an established level. After uni, the first company that I was consulting for, who was predominantly looking after racing drivers, I had about 50 drivers from karting, junior Ginettas, all the way through to Formula 1, Le Mans, IndyCar. So, like I say, almost a baptism of fire of having guys at all levels and having guys at the highest levels from the start.
And what kind of things do you help them improve? What are the main areas you look at to try and enhance?
It depends on the level to degree that you're working with the driver. From the training side, the majority of it, there's a lot of strength-based elements, and there's a lot of kind of cardiovascular and endurance-based elements as well. Mainly due to the nature of the sport, the high strength demands that the G-forces place on them, the high muscular endurance demands that 2-3 hour stints in cars place on them, and the having a heart rate which is equivalent to running a marathon. You know, you're constantly talking 140, 150 beats a minute, and peaking at closer to 200 at times. So from a training side, it's pretty well rounded on that front in terms of a lot of base strength stuff, especially legs, core, neck, grip, cardiovascular endurance, and then, like I say, if you're going down the route of working with a driver as a kind of their physio as such at a race as well, then there's a lot more in terms of the psychology of things like arousal, motivation, things like the attribution theory of, well, if things go well or things go badly, what is in their control, what's not in their control, and focusing on the important factors. Nutrition being a big part of that as well, especially when it comes to a race weekend.
Yeah.
And being on the go all of the time. So yeah, it's a pretty well versed and well rounded scope of things. But for me, I'm always a fan. You know, first and foremost, I'm a sports scientist and strength and conditioning coach. While I will work with them on the psychology and nutrition side of it, I'm always a big exponent as well of having guys involved or referring out to guys who specialise in those areas.
Sure, no, that makes sense. I think I've been guilty of this in the past, and that's sticking to what you know. Like being a coach, I suppose you've all got this instinct of wanting to help, and sometimes people could be guilty of offering advice in areas maybe they shouldn't. So I think it's good to make sure that if you really want the best for an athlete or really best for a performer, I suppose, then you need to refer them to the person who knows the most about that subject.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like you say, we fundamentally have an understanding of it and a knowledge of it. It all ties into what we do. But like you say, if you're working with guys who are looking to get the absolute maximum out of themselves, we wouldn't look at a nutritionist, for example, to deliver a strength and conditioning program for somebody. Yeah. So the same way on that front is that I wouldn't look to go and give them a fully in-depth program on the nutrition when I could refer it out to somebody else. Yeah, okay, I might work with that person, get them to deliver it, and then I'm the person delivering the day-to-day contact with them. But I'll make sure that it's all guided by somebody who specialises in that area.
No, I completely agree, mate. I think that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? What would you say the biggest challenges drivers have that you feel that you spend most time helping them with?
One of the biggest ones for a lot of the drivers comes down to a lot of postural elements. And what will surprise most people here is actually they're fairly closely linked to a lot of people who sit behind a desk each day. In the amount of time that the drivers spend in a position where they're sat with flexion through the hip, with rounded thoracic and with their shoulders rolled forward, it presents a lot of challenges in terms of postural weaknesses. So they'll often be very tight through the hip flexors, and you'll often see a lot of weakness, for example, in the glute medius. You will often see they're very tight through the front of the pecs, or through front of the shoulders and through the pecs, and weak around the scapula, the shoulder blades, and the rotator cuffs, which tends to, if we don't do anything about it, lead to that hunched over posture, which isn't going to help anybody in the long run. So there's a lot of work to address that early on and make sure they don't go down the route of bad posture, because that's only then going to lead to an increased risk of injuries. So first and foremost is establishing a strong base from a postural standpoint. On top of that, it's then building the endurance to sustain a prolonged period in a car where repeatedly generate or fight against high forces and loads on the body.
I suppose it's something to easily not think about.
Yeah.
Like most sports, the obvious things usually aren't addressed first.
I think the other element with motorsport, especially if for those that haven't been involved in it, is the only reference people have is driving a road car, really.
Yeah.
You know, and you can drive your road car and you can then look at somebody racing and go, yeah, but they're just sat in a car. How is it that demanding? You know, you could sit and you could press your brake in your road car all day long. You sit in a race car. Some stats are done around the Canadian Grand Prix, for example. Over the course of the race duration, a driver needs to apply 98,000 kilos of force to the brake pedal with just their left leg in a 2-hour duration. You know, and most of those you're talking 80 to 100 kilos of force each time. So if you were to say to somebody, right, I want you to go into your local gym, go to the leg press and sit and leg press 98,000 kilos with just your left leg, minimum of 80 kilos on each leg press. It then starts to hit home and people start to realise and get a bit of an understanding. When you throw in the heat or the sensory information they're having to deal with.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, you know, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Having the radios and communication, changes on the steering wheel, high heart rate, forces on the neck all at the same time, it soon becomes quite a hostile and demanding environment for somebody to perform in for up to 2 hours.
Sounds like a psychophysiological minefield, really, doesn't it?
It is.
A lot going on. I suppose it must be very easy to make a mistake when you're that overloaded with information. The more conditioned you are to it, hopefully the less room for error there is.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, that goes back to when you look at the elements like concentration, decision-making, reactions. What are the first things that start to suffer when you become physically fatigued? Well, it is things like your coordination, your decision making. So actually, a lot of the time, you can see drivers getting out of a car, they don't necessarily seem physically completely fatigued, but the mental, the cognitive performance has started to drop off because of that fatigue starting to creep in.
So, what would you say are your top 3 areas of interest at the moment which help you work with the athletes that you do?
For me, thermoregulation is a big one. That is always a challenge when it comes to motorsport. You know, it's always looking at ways of how can we best prepare people to deal with high levels of heat, high levels of humidity, and the inevitable dehydration that is going to ensue, especially from a standpoint of working with drivers at a race weekend. That's then how can we replenish, rehydrate them and get them back to peak performance as quickly as possible, often with a short time frame in terms of turnaround to do so between sessions. Cardiovascular endurance is always a big one, but it's always looking at ways of developing that cardiovascular endurance, but also not overloading people through certain movement patterns. So one thing I often find with a lot of racing drivers is they love to go and run, and they love to go and ride a bike. A lot of them because they perceive that's how they're gonna drop weight, for example, as well. And yeah, it does contribute to that. Yes, it is going to then build cardiovascular endurance, but going back to the postural elements that we were kind of discussing about, both of those then are very hip flexion dominant. So it's trying to develop the cardiovascular endurance, but without getting them to spend huge amounts of time doing hip flexion dominant activities when they're in a, for example, very hip flexion dominant position in the car to balance out that posture. And I guess the third element for me is it's not necessarily all just related to motorsport. It's one that interests me in general. Is the strength development side of it. The caveat with motorsport is developing that strength, but minimising any weight gain, for example, as well. So you look at a lot of sports. You could look at NFL and rugby, for example, and you go, there's a lot of evidence and history there making very, very strong, very powerful guys. Weight's not necessarily an issue. So you look at them, you go, right, fine, we can develop that strength, and putting on a lot of lean mass, if anything, is helpful. Whereas in motorsport, putting on a lot of lean mass for a lot of drivers is a hindrance, because every additional kilo of weight in the car is tenths of a second on a track, or is less ability for them to move ballast around within the car when setting it up to optimise performance. So it's always a trade-off, and it's looking at ways of doing things that are pretty well established in terms of scientific principles, but having to combine a lot of them together.
Sure. So, based on all the experiences you've had doing what you do, what would you say the most valuable things you've learnt are so far?
One of the biggest ones is it's all well and good knowing the scientific principles and having an ideal plan based on what the theory and literature says will work, but it's being adaptable. And I think that's a trait that will come back to whatever athlete it is that you're working with. But it is being adaptable. You can have the best plan, you can have everything planned out, and then you'll get a phone call from your athlete or from a driver saying, I've got to go and do a session in the sim tomorrow, or I've got to go and do X, Y, and Z for media, or I'm on a flight to here, when you've planned to be doing something from a training perspective, and you've got to adapt and change it about so they can still achieve what you want them to achieve, but it might be that they've got a lot less time to do it. It might be that actually they don't then have access to facilities or equipment you had planned, or you're having to move their training week about and go, right, well, we may have had a gym session planned. Right, well, what can we do from a cardiovascular endurance or an energy system perspective instead, and moving the sessions around that way. So that for me would probably be the biggest one, and I think that relates to near enough any sport as well.
Well, I was just about to say that I think that you're not alone there. I can imagine there'd be more regular external changes with a sport like motorsport compared to maybe more traditional sports, because there's just so many moving parts, and there's the teams that involve, the teams of which we're all contributing towards that performance are so much bigger. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think you're alone there. I think that's something I've learned as a coach over the years, to have a form of plan. Yeah. But it will hardly ever end up doing what you'd planned out to do with that athlete on very rare occasions for so many reasons.
I tend to work on the kind of same basis now. I'll have a plan. Yeah. But I plan for that plan to change.
Yes, sure.
Because actually the chances of it running to plan and being able to go, right, we can do everything exactly as we would want to for a couple of weeks, months, etc., just doesn't happen.
Yeah, sure. No, I completely hear that. People listening would be nodding in agreement as well if they're experienced coaches.
I mean, I think the ironic thing at the minute is, given everything that is going on in the world at the minute, it is probably now the one time where actually the athletes are able to stick to the plan. Yeah. And you can just write the plan and go, right, what would I ideally want to do? Yeah. This is what I want to do, and it gets done because they're not being pulled from pillar to post with other commitments.
There's no distractions, is there? I'm personally my training's been the best it's been for
Yeah.
a long time, because
Yeah.
when I plan out to do something at the moment, it's done. There's nothing really that gets in the way. So how has the COVID-19 lockdown kind of been affecting you and your athletes, and how have you gone about changing around those systems and processes?
So for me, it's a case of a bit like you personally. It's actually given me a bit more time to train myself, which has been nice. Like I say, for a lot of the drivers, it has meant that they haven't necessarily got access to as much in terms of kit and equipment as they would want. Some have access to gyms, some don't. So thankfully, it's given a lot of them an opportunity to actually stick to the training, stick to the plan, like we were just discussing there, without it having to change.
Yeah, sure.
It's actually been quite nice with some of them who are normally on the go a lot of the time, to address some issues that we've wanted to for a prolonged period. You know, so there's some guys, for example, who might have had some niggling little postural injuries, which normally we work on, but become a challenge when they're constantly jumping on flights or having to travel a lot. So actually having a couple of weeks based in one place has given us a nice opportunity to really address some of those issues and prevent them coming back again.
Yeah, sure.
And actually, for most of them, we've just used it as a prolonged off season.
Yeah.
That's one of the other challenges of motorsport, is that the off season in general is actually pretty short, and there isn't really much of one. So it's been nice in a way to have a bit of that, an extended block in terms of an off season for some general physical prep.
As you know, I work with a lot of youth athletes in a variety of sports, and the one thing I've seen massively improve in all of them is their daily monitoring, right? Their welfare, their mood, their energy, their sleep, the soreness, sleep in particular. That we monitor heart rate variability as well in some of them, and the readings are the best I think I've ever seen them.
Yeah.
Just because they've got that, as we kind of alluded to earlier, that slightly changeless routine. Their recovery is brilliant.
I've noticed the same. I think I would also say that actually the tracking of it,
yeah, sure,
has improved as well.
Yeah,
because actually 5 minutes now to fill in the kind of the feedback on that side of it. They've got the time to do it. They don't see that as something else to squeeze into the day now. It's almost something to actually do to fill some time.
It's been interesting how the ways of the world lately have affected some things.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Better. Whether or not, I think they'll all stay positive for as long as this goes on. We'll see. But
and like you say, there's also an element there with the athletes who are then asking for more, is that balancing out and making sure they're not overtraining, because out of boredom I've gone, well, I'm just going to go and train and I'm not going to recover. I'm just going to train for 4 or 5 hours a day. So it throws up other challenges.
A lot of the endurance athletes, like the long distance runners and rowers, cyclists I've worked with, their mileage has gone up more than their guidelines.
Yep.
Some only by a bit, but some others by a lot. So me and the coaches have had to clamp down on that. But it's easy to do, isn't it? If you've got nothing else to do, well, I might as well just do another half an hour, or might just do another 5k. Like, was it going to matter? But it does all add up.
Or it's meant to be a rest day, but actually it's nice weather outside, so well, I might just go out on my bike for an hour and a half. But that's still more volume and more load through, going back to hip flexion, that we don't necessarily want.
Do you use any monitoring technology or apps with any of your athletes?
I do, yeah. So for me, the same one that I use for a lot of the programming, especially for the guys who are based internationally, is on True Coach.
Yeah.
So I've set some metrics up on there to track things like sleep, to track things like their resting heart rate, muscle soreness, and all that lot. So I will track it all through that, because it's all in one place, and it's literally just they can go on there, select on the 1 to 10 scale. It's done. It's nice and easy. But for me, it's all in one place. The program's in one place.
Yeah.
It generates a nice graph for me as well. So actually, instead of just looking at daily values, it means I can look at trends over a longer period of time and take out that day-to-day fluctuation that can sometimes be misleading.
Yeah, sure. I think some. I mean, I've used so many different ones, and I think you can have almost too many cooks in the kitchen with technology these days. But I think less is more.
Yeah, same.
The biggest challenge I've always had with pro athletes all the way down to kind of youth recreational athletes is them getting them to understand the value that monitoring can provide them, and then getting them to buy in, to change their habits, to fill it in daily. It's always been a very difficult one to solve, especially when working with large numbers.
I think, again, that's part of the reason that I actually went down the route of doing it on True Coach rather than doing it through Excel spreadsheets and stuff, is that it then meant that everything for them is in one place.
Yeah.
And actually, I've gone through and refined it right down to keep it as simple as I can for that reason.
Yeah, sure.
So it's not a burden on them in terms of time in the day or having to fill it in. Yeah. It's making it as easy as it is for them, while still giving valuable information to them and of guide their programming.
No, I completely agree, mate. I think keeping it simple is still the way to go with it, and then maybe if the adherence improves or stabilises, you could maybe add in an additional metric if you feel that's going to be valuable. But as soon as it gets too complicated or too much of a hassle, I just find that it drops off. Moving on to the next question, who would you say have been your top influences in your career, who've helped guide you or provide you with insights, information, given you opportunities to get you to where you are?
So I've been pretty lucky on that one, in that I've kind of met and still speak to and work with a lot of very, very good coaches. Yeah. Like I say, Andy Blow and Elliot Channafort up at the Porsche Centre at Silverstone, definitely two of them. Fair play to those guys. It's not often you'll find somewhere that are prepared to let somebody come in, do work experience, work with athletes, straight out of college without having a degree or anything like that. I still take athletes back up there at times as well to get tested. And they're great guys, really, really knowledgeable. They were a big influence in actually giving me the first insight into working with drivers, which was for me invaluable. One coach who actually I kind of look to a lot is Christian Woodford over in Australia. Mm-hmm. He's very passionate, very driven, and actually does a great job of blending the science and real life application. But I also really like his approach, his mentality, which is keeping it simple. Sure. It's not about doing fancy stuff. It's not about doing what will look good on social media. It's about, right, let's nail the basics and let's just improve performance, which is fundamentally what we're there for, and what a lot of time gets overlooked. Outside of that, I've been really lucky. There's Dave Thompson at Renault, head of human performance at Renault, really good guy. Dean Fausch, who was head of performance at Straka. Simon Reynolds, who was with McLaren, has now set up his own company as well. So I've been very lucky to be kind of surrounded by and be able to speak to and throw ideas about with a lot of very, very knowledgeable and great coaches.
Awesome. I think I've been very lucky too, with people who've guided me through different pathways throughout my career and the different things I've done, and I like to never forget that the importance of that, because I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So I do occasionally like to pay that back to kind of younger aspiring coaches, and the part of the reason for the podcast is that to kind of pass on, hopefully useful information to people who are either starting out in their career or as coaches or sports scientists or any athletes who feel that they need a bit more of a structured guidelines or more advice. It all adds up. I think we're all in it for the same reasons, aren't we? All to get better, all for the love of sport and performance.
The thing is as well that nobody benefits from not sharing information, is the way I look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, a couple more questions for you, mate.
Yep.
Next one is, and this is the one people hate answering because they're like, just so many answers I could give, but I don't know where to start. What would you say your top performance exercises and or drills are that you'd use more regularly with your drivers?
For me, it's actually going right back to the basics.
Yeah.
Right back to basics. One of the biggest ones is the squat.
Okay.
For me, it does a huge amount in terms of developing strength in the legs. It does a huge amount of developing strength through the glutes as well, which both aids in performance and posture. But it also brings in elements like having to create tension, brace through the core, breathe at the same time, which translates through to every sporting movement that we do. And it's adaptable. We can use it to develop strength, we can use it to develop power, we can use it to develop muscular endurance, all of which in turn have a knock-on in terms of aerobic performance as well, because the stronger you are, the lower the relative intensity you're then working at if you're out running, things like that, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one of them, first and foremost. Clamshells, really, really, really basic. No equipment, etc. needed. But again, for most drivers, from a postural standpoint, and actually this will carry over to most athletes and near enough everybody sat behind the desk as well, in terms of developing strength and strength endurance in the glute med, which is only going to provide stability around the hip, strength around the hip joint as well, which is going to aid with running, it's going to aid with any sporting movement, whether it's jumping, squatting, sprinting, changes of direction. That for me is probably my go-to. The third one for me, I wouldn't necessarily say it's an exercise, but I would say it's a group of exercises.
Yeah.
Would be core work where we're having to create tension through the entire, both anterior and posterior chain. So kind of that isometric strength, which could be anything like planks, reverse planks, dragon flags, and then you can even throw in adding additional load at the same time with things like calf presses. So basically exercises that are going to create or force you to create that tension through the entire trunk, but maintain it for a prolonged period of time while breathing and while being subjected to load from different directions too.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. No, that's really interesting. I love asking that question just because everyone's answers are so different, and they relate to the specific subject that we're discussing too. So what would you say, I don't know if you could give a standardised answer here, obviously, because everyone's different, but say if a driver has a race at a certain time in the day, how long beforehand, before that race starts, would you need to get them?
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Start getting them prepared, and what kind of things would you go through?
So that will very much be driven by what is actually on the schedule in terms of that race.
Yeah, sure.
So it does vary depending on what they've got to do beforehand, press, media, engineers, etc., etc. But in general, for me, I would always look to do something in the morning at a hotel, whether that's just to get in the pool for a little bit in the morning, do some stretching, or just do some very, very light work in the gym. Just nothing that's going to tire them out, nothing that's going to fatigue them, will be high volume, but just something that is going to kind of fire the body up, wake them up, fire up the central nervous system. What we would then look to do at the track is, for most of them, you're probably going to look at about an hour before the start of the race. If we would look to do some sort of warm-up. In an ideal world, it wouldn't be that long before, but you've got to allow the time for them to actually get in the cars or get to garage, speak to engineer for the last bits they need to, get in a car, get that car to the grid. You've then usually got 15, 20 minutes, half an hour on the grid as well, where they've got things like national anthem, meet and greet with fans, press, last bits to engineers, etc., checking the cars are right. So yeah, most instances probably about an hour before they get in the car, and again that's going to kind of follow the ramp protocol. So we're going to be doing something that's going to get their heart rate up a bit. That's very driver dependent on what they enjoy. Some it might be skipping, some it could be kicking a football about, some it could be pad work and boxing. Depends on their individual preference, but something that they enjoy. There'll be some work in there in terms of activation, so some things like the clamshells for the glutes, some activation work in terms of things like rotator cuffs, so it might be internal and external banded rotations, it could be band pull aparts. We'll look at spend 5-10 minutes on some mobilization work, again especially areas around ankles, hips, hip flexors, thoracic spine and shoulders, and then we'll finish off with some kind of potentiation work. So it could be some quick explosive drills, like some pogos. We'll do a little bit of banded neck work as well, just to fire the neck up before they get in the car too.
Awesome. That's really interesting. I've always wondered what they do. I've seen bits and bobs going on Formula One days. It's really interesting to get a little bit more of an insight. So thanks for that. And then conversely, what would they do after a race? What kind of how involved are you in that process when they're finished for recovery?
You're still involved, but it varies after every session on a race weekend.
Yeah, sure.
So, for example, if it's between the likes of free practice and qualifying or free practice sessions, you've probably only got about an hour and a half, 2 hour window.
Yeah.
And again, you're very much driven by their commitments in terms of engineers in the car and the media. So a lot of the time it's they'll get out the car, they'll debrief with their engineer or the engineers, they'll fulfill their media commitment, so speaking to the press, doing written and TV media interviews, etc. It's then usually a case of get them in, do some mobility, do some sports massage and some recovery work, get some food in them, which is kind of stuff we've worked out beforehand.
Yeah.
And the other big one is kind of, as I said earlier, the rehydration element. So one thing that we will always do is, over the course of a race weekend, is track a driver's hydration. You can do urine osmolality, you can do weight, you can do water percentage, and even go right back to the basics of just the P chart in terms of colour.
Yeah.
I tend to use a combination of at least three of them to give a nice rounded picture and make sure it's not skewed. So you'll have your baseline start of the weekend. We will know they're hydrated when they get in the car. We'll have a weight just before they get in the car as well. And we will then weigh them, for example, straight after. So you've got an idea there of how much they have lost in terms of fluid, and what we've then got to do to replace in terms of how much can somebody actually drink in an hour or per hour.
Yeah, sure.
And weight around that side.
Awesome. No, that's fascinating. Not dissimilar from other sports, but I suppose there's very specific variables depending on the type of drive they've done, as you said. That's really interesting, Alex. Coming to the last questions then, based on everything you've done and everything you're doing and everything you're going to be doing, what would you say your top pieces of advice would be for any athletes looking to get into motorsport, and or any coaches working with athletes in motorsport?
I think for the athletes looking to get into it is don't neglect the physical side of it early on. Mm-hmm. It's a sport where it can be easy to look at it and go, I'm going to rely on natural talent, or the way a lot of people look at it relies on your money and your backing, etc. Yeah, it's a rich man's sport, and to a degree it does, whether that comes from sponsors or family money or whatever. Yes, talent does play a big part in it, but being physically prepared only enhances the natural talent and natural ability. Physically preparing yourself to be as strong, as mobile, and as fit in terms of a strength endurance perspective as well, keeps you injury free, prolongs a career, helps reduce the risk of injuries. But actually, should somebody get injured for whatever reason, and unfortunately, it does still happen, it's still a dangerous sport, it puts you in the best position possible in terms of recovering and rehab from it. From a coaching perspective, I think this is probably true of any coach wanting to work in any sport as well, is work in a sport that you're passionate about, because if you're passionate about the sport and you have an interest in it anyway, you're more likely to understand the demands that are placed on those athletes and the demands of what they're going to go through. So having that understanding helps. But I would also say, I think we touched on it earlier, is speak to people, network with people, talk to or try and spend some time around coaches that are involved in it and learn from them. And ultimately, it's a bit like anything. It's always going to be a learning process, no matter what level you're at. Yeah. So, go find some local kart races, for example, and go and speak to some of the young kids karting, and try and start working with some of them, because that will still give you a good idea of the demands that they face. Those are the guys who are ultimately going to be progressing up the ladder and going further. But it gives you a bit of an opportunity to learn and to grow at the same time.
Mm. Oh, that's great advice. Thanks for sharing that. It's always interesting to hear what people say when I ask that question, because everyone's had so many different experiences. Yeah. So everyone's always got different answers. So, Alex, if someone wanted to find out a little bit more about you and what you do, even maybe ask you a question, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Either through social media and Instagram, which is probably the one that I'm on the most, which would be @stott_fitness. Either that or through my website, which is alex-stott.com, and my email's on there as well. So awesome. I'm pretty easy for people to get hold of. Yeah. And I'll always look to find the time to get back to people.
Brilliant. Well, Stay on the line because we're just going to end the recording, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you very much. I've learned a lot in this last 45 minutes. It's been a pleasure to have you on, so thanks for your time.
More than welcome.
Thanks for listening to the 27th episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please leave us a rating and or review on whichever platform you're listening on. Please check out our website, www.extremesportsperformance.com. On our media page, we have weekly blogs that include Thought of the Week, Exercise of the Week, Recipe of the Week, and Training Song of the Week. Each month's collection gets compiled into our monthly newsletter along with company service and store updates. You can sign up for free to receive this via our subscribe page. Our online store consists of training programs, online and in-person coaching, nutrition plans, toolbox, and interactive training systems. Please follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Links to these can be found at the bottom of every page on our website or via any search engine. That's all for now. Until next time, take care.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.